The morning he announced his departure, Alexander Whitmore made sure every detail looked convincing, from the neatly packed leather suitcase resting by the staircase to the driver waiting precisely at 9 o'clock to take him to the airport. To the world, he was a decisive billionaire flying to Europe to secure another multimillion-dollar acquisition, a man whose time was measured in contracts and quarterly projections. But behind the composed expression and tailored suit was a father unsettled by something he could not ignore. His 10-year-old son Daniel, left partially paralyzed after the accident that had claimed his mother's life, had always been transparent with his emotions. Since childhood, Daniel's eyes had spoken more fluently than his fragile limbs ever could. Lately, however, those same eyes carried hesitation, as if words were trapped behind fear. Clara, the maid hired 6 months earlier after extensive screening, had appeared to be a blessing at first. She was attentive, efficient, gentle in Alexander's presence, often speaking to Daniel in soothing tones while adjusting his wheelchair or preparing his meals. For a brief time, Alexander believed he had finally found stability in the chaos that had followed his wife's death. Yet subtle cracks began to form. He noticed how Daniel flinched slightly when Clara entered the room unexpectedly. He observed faint red marks around his son's wrists one evening, brushed off as therapy irritation but lingering in his mind long after. There were moments when he overheard Clara's voice from down the hallway, not loud, but edged with impatience, stripped of warmth. The instant she sensed his approach, her tone would soften again, transforming into polite concern. Alexander had built his empire on reading between lines, detecting risk where others saw none. That same instinct now whispered that something was wrong inside his own home. Instead of confronting Clara outright, he chose strategy over impulse. Quietly, he upgraded the home's security system, installing discreet cameras in the living room and main corridors under the guise of improving safety. He told Clara he would be traveling for 2 weeks to finalize a deal overseas, apologizing for leaving Daniel but reassuring her that he trusted her completely. The irony burned inside him. He hugged his son a little longer that morning, feeling Daniel's thin arms cling tighter than usual. "I'll call every night," he promised, searching his child's face for reassurance. Daniel forced a small smile, yet something unspoken trembled behind it. Alexander stepped into the car, waved once more, and allowed the gates of the mansion to close behind him. But instead of boarding his flight, he instructed the driver to take him to a private hotel across the city. In a quiet suite overlooking the skyline, he opened his laptop, logged into the live security feed, and waited. Hours passed with nothing alarming. Clara moved about the house normally, assisting Daniel with lunch, reading aloud in the afternoon light. Doubt crept into Alexander's thoughts, making him question whether grief and overprotectiveness had distorted his judgment. Still, he kept watching. As evening settled and the other staff retreated, he saw Clara will Daniel into the living room. Her posture shifted the moment she believed they were alone. The softness evaporated from her face. Her gestures grew abrupt, mechanical. She spoke sharply, criticizing Daniel's slow movements, mocking his dependence. When his arm trembled while reaching for a book, she shoved it back onto his lap with visible irritation. Alexander leaned closer to the screen, his heartbeat thundering in his ears. Then he watched her remove Daniel's communication device and place it deliberately out of reach, telling him he needed to stop acting helpless. Daniel's eyes filled with silent tears, his small body rigid with humiliation. In that instant, every doubt vanished. The trip had been a performance, but what he was witnessing was cruelly real. Alexander did not remember grabbing his coat or leaving the hotel. He only remembered the roaring in his ears and the image of Daniel's tear-filled eyes frozen on the screen. During the drive back to the mansion, the city lights blurred into streaks of red and white, and every traffic signal felt like a personal insult, delaying him from reaching his son. Yet even in his fury, he remained calculated. He had already forwarded the recorded footage to his private security chief and contacted the authorities, ensuring that when he arrived, he would not be acting on emotion alone but on undeniable evidence. By the time his car sped through the gates, 2 security vehicles were pulling in behind him. Inside the house, Clara was still in the living room, standing beside Daniel's wheelchair with an expression of irritation that had not yet faded back into its usual mask of sweetness. The sound of the front door slamming open startled her. She turned, her face draining of color as Alexander stepped into the room. No suitcase in hand, no trace of business composure left. Only a father whose trust had been shattered. Daniel's eyes widened, shock quickly transforming into relief so profound it almost hurt to witness. For a second, no one spoke. Then Clara began to stammer, attempting to piece together excuses about discipline and misunderstandings, claiming Daniel was too sensitive, that she had only been trying to make him stronger. Her voice trembled, but the performance was hollow now. Alexander said nothing at first. He simply held up his phone and pressed play. The footage filled the silence. Her cold tone, the sharp movement of her hands, the deliberate removal of the communication device. Each second erased any possibility of denial. When security stepped forward to escort her out, she protested weakly, but even she seemed to understand that the illusion had collapsed. The door closed behind her with a finality that echoed through the marble hallway. The house fell silent again, but this time the silence felt like a breath being released after months of suffocation. Alexander crossed the room and knelt in front of Daniel, his expensive suit creasing against the floor as if status no longer mattered. Up close, he could see the faint marks on his son's wrists more clearly, could see the exhaustion behind his young face. "I'm so sorry," he whispered, his voice breaking despite every attempt to remain strong. Daniel reached slowly for his father's hand, his fingers trembling not from fear now but from overwhelming relief. Once his communication device was placed back in his lap, he typed carefully, each letter deliberate. "I knew you would come." Those words shattered Alexander more than any accusation could have. In the days that followed, the mansion transformed. Lawyers handled the legal consequences. Therapists were brought in to help Daniel process what he had endured, and Alexander dismantled the illusion that wealth alone guaranteed safety. He rearranged his schedule, canceling non-essential travel, shifting meetings to virtual platforms, and delegating responsibilities he once insisted on controlling personally. More importantly, he changed his presence from distant provider to constant guardian. He sat beside Daniel during therapy sessions, learned every detail of his care routine, and personally vetted any future caregivers with a scrutiny that came not from paranoia but from hard-earned awareness. Evenings became sacred chess matches in the study, shared documentaries, quiet conversations on the balcony overlooking the city skyline. One night, as the sun dipped below the horizon and painted the sky in gold, Alexander admitted softly that pretending to leave had been the only way to uncover the truth. Daniel typed back, slower but steady, "You didn't leave, you watched." In that simple correction lay a profound truth. Alexander realized that protection was not about grand gestures or expensive safeguards. It was about attention, about listening when something felt wrong, about being present even when unseen. His empire still stood tall in the corporate world, but his greatest responsibility had nothing to do with markets or mergers. It was the fragile, resilient heart of the boy beside him, who had endured cruelty in silence yet never stopped believing his father would return.